Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of The Big Jalebi. I'm Shazad Sheikh with my co-hosts Lucky and Jalpreet. Just introduce yourself, guys. Lucky?
Hi, I'm Lucky Singh. I'm a social media influencer, work in property business, finance, legal work, helping clients with their wealth creation and property.
And Jalpreet?
Also involved in property, high-end property, off-market, residential, commercial and hotels, and also in luxury brands. So as per last time, I think luxury.
Your luxury brands. What brands are you involved in?
Well, I think, okay, I'll show you. I brought in the gold champagne this time.
You brought some champain?
I promised you last time.
We brought champagne, guys. We have jalebi and we have champagne. Let's have it.
So there you go. There's the gold champagne for you.
Wow.
Wait a minute. We can't drink that.
Well, it's real gold, and I don't drink, so I thought this is perfect.
Are you sure
Wait
they're
a minute.
not Ferrero Rocher wrappers?
Hang on. Seriously, you know what? You're right. For those people listening and not watching, they do look like a bottle full of Ferrero Rocher wrappers. Are you telling me this is real gold?
Real 24 karat gold.
Genuinely?
Genuinely.
Okay, I'll look after this for you. It may not be there later on. And I'm Shazad Sheikh. I'm a motoring journalist. Check me out on #BrownCarGuy. And any information or advice, guidance that you need about cars, come and talk to me. I can help you. Today we have a very special guest, Jane Bayler, who's an author, property developer, thought leader, mentor, and she's 20 years in the media industry. She's worked in film, television, advertising, all that. But she's also here to talk about a book that she's just written, The Smart Connector, which has just come out. What is The Smart Connector all about, Jane?
Well, it is a book about entrepreneurial relationship success. So most of my career, I've worked in business development. I've worked on the relationship side of business. So it is about that, but also Smart Connection is if you like, it goes much deeper than that. It's not just about business. In my view, there is nothing more important in business than people and the relationships that you have. But it's also really about life and about how Smart Connection is the best way to go through life, because what could be more important than the relationships that you have?
So, Lucky, is Smart Connection just another way of saying networking?
I would say it's more than that. I would say that Smart Connector is being very, very value-based in terms of how you interact. So rather than meeting 1,000 people and expecting a result, you might find that working with one or two people that actually have very similar values to you are the ones which might make the difference in your success in your business or your life. Am I right, Jane, in my thinking?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly, there could be quite a few principles, but that's certainly one of them. You know, that sometimes it only takes one person to make the difference that you're looking for in your business or life. I mean, isn't that what marriage is all about, right? So, I mean, you know, you can apply the same principles to business. You know, sometimes the right business partner or the right investor or, you know, the right colleague, somebody can come along and make that difference to your life that you're looking for.
So you've clearly been able to apply this to great success. There was some credentials that you wanted to mention, didn't you, Lucky?
Yeah, I think one of the most important credentials that I think we haven't stated yet, I think you're going to hear it here first. Jane is also somewhat, you could say, a prolific businesswoman, because she literally grew a business from £1 million, or I would say it's probably less than that, into a £6 million turnover business in a period of a year, which I think is incredible. So I think that's another story we need to actually delve into.
Let's come back to that, because that does sound absolutely amazing. But just to keep with this the Smart Connector thing, is this Smart Connector principle something that you apply in your daily life, Jalpreet?
As part of the brand awareness proposal we give to brands, we do a similar approach, I would say. I'd say to these brands, they go to so many networking events, they sometimes don't gel with the right person because they're not used to talking about their product or themselves.
Yeah.
Or sometimes they talk too much and don't listen. So from what I do generally is to say to a brand, okay, you focus on your business, let me focus on actually being a brand ambassador for you.
Yes.
And I'll go to the events that I have access to. I'll talk about the relevant brand to the relevant person by listening to them.
Yes.
And that way I think you get a much more dedicated hot lead, if you like to call that word,
Definitely.
But also there's a conversation I can have with somebody and then introduce them to the owner, and it gives that extra gravitas, if you like, to say, it's great, we've met, I understand what you need, this is what the owner can do, now you can talk. And I think that way you get some sort of success.
Definitely.
So, and the way I would say, I'm just going to move this giant bottle from behind me, and I'm just gonna. So, listen, can you put this in my car? Yeah, it's the Honda. Next week it'll be the Rolls Royce. Anyway, so coming back to what you touched upon there, you particularly I thought was interesting, relationships. Now, in sort of the field that I work in with automotive, and I deal with automotive PR. And sometimes I've been asked, like, what makes good PR? What makes is it the press releases? Is it the trips? Is it the gifts? All of this sort of stuff. And my response has always been, it's the relationship. Because if you have a relationship with the PR guy or the PR manager or the product manager, you can, not only from my point of view, I can work so much better with that brand or that product, but also they can thwart a lot of things that could go wrong for them in terms of what I might find or what I might say. If I have a relationship with somebody and I can't understand the car, I can't understand some aspect of it, I feel comfortable enough to call up that person. And I find that's the most important thing. Do you think that is what this is about, and that's how things apply in the world at large?
Yes, very, very much so. Business relationships, they lead to financial success and wealth creation, longevity of businesses. It's really it really is the smart approach to entrepreneurial success and business growth. You cannot ignore the people aspect of business. If you do, then your business won't last. So it is very, very important. But these days, connection also happens at scale, obviously. So I did work for 20 years in media and entertainment. So it's very important when you're talking about brand, for example, that you are able to resonate with people at scale. And so smart connection is also about resonating, marketing, about resonating and getting your brand message out, and it actually being meaningful to the people that you're targeting. So it is also about that.
There's one thing I noticed though, sometimes a brand has a brand message.
Yeah.
However, influencers have their own message about that brand.
Yes.
And some brands like to steer influencers towards their direction.
Yes.
However, the honesty then leaves. Isn't it a case where some influencers should be left to provide their message for their audience and veer away from the brand message sometimes? Or is that always going to hurt a brand, or does it help a brand?
Yes, well, that's a very interesting question, because I think it partly depends on the influencer and the brand, really, doesn't it? So if you put the wrong influencer with a brand, then it's going to send mixed messages out to the market, isn't it? So that's why, again, it's very important for the message to be congruent, for connection to be congruent.
But that's been happening a lot, hasn't it? Especially in this era of influencers,
Yes.
The mismatch of brands and influencers, because some people just go out, oh, they got numbers, let's just go with that, but not actually looking at, who are the demographics, who's actually following that person, will they actually have an influential voice?
Yes, exactly. So it, again, it just takes sophistication, really, in terms of creating the right partnerships, and wherever you find a partnership, it has to be the right one, whether it's between a brand and an influencer, or whether it's between two businesses that are coming together for the purpose of a greater goal. All of those things are important, but it's not just about the mechanism of doing it. It's about being smart around relationships and doing it for the right reasons.
Lucky, you say you're an influencer.
Yeah.
How do you find that works for you then?
It can be quite tough, because you've got to be very clear about what you're doing and really how you're going to connect with people. So what I do as a business is we do a lot of complex cases in restructuring portfolios, doing bridging finance, etc. But what I do is I make it a point, when I'm actually acting as an influencer, actually not talk about anything that we do in business so much, because you're going to be boring your audiences to death about what you're doing. So what I do is I try to make it a bit like the big jalebi. I try to make it entertaining, give them things which are going to help them in their journey. So as an influencer, I think it's more about trying to understand, trying to connect with different audiences to actually help them in their journey is the way I look at it. And I think that always helps rather than plugging your own message. And I think that probably goes back to branding as well. So I'm sort of acting as the PR of the brand or our organizations, because there's about 15 of them. If I plugged all of them, then I think we'll have a confused message. So I keep it very, very simple, just professional content, things which are going to be motivational content, business content, property content, but not something that's going to be selling our services. So I steer away of selling anything really, apart from this particular message now.
There you go. So I
was going to jump in.
well, before you do that, I was just going to ask, are you saying that people are influenced more by the messenger sometimes than the actual message?
I think there's a contrast, because if you're trying to sell your own brand organization, you may actually have to put that out in different platforms. Whereas if you're trying to be more of, let's just say, a senior director of the organization, you may not actually want to be plugging the message of all those different brands. You have to maybe talk about yourself as a personality so people get to know you.
I think I agree with you, because I think that's quite important, because I think it's got to do with how you relate to an individual and how you relate to somebody that you may be following in whatever platform. Sorry, Jalpesh, you were going to say something.
I was going to say it's time to plug our brand.
Yeah, go for it, man.
We got the big jalebi, so I think we haven't done that.
Let's do that. So, Lucky, will you please invite Jane to try? So have you ever had any jalebi?
No, I haven't. It looks delicious. It looks exactly like the kind of very unhealthy snack that I love.
So while Jane is devouring that jalebi with some relish, I should add, Jalpesh, can you put into context, because Lucky mentioned that she took a £1 million company to 6 million, just for the benefit of our audience. How big of a deal is doing something like that?
It's very challenging, especially when you look at world economics, how the world relates to each other. There's a lot of changes that happen, and every little change can affect a business, and it relates to your audience, your clients. Even when it comes to actually getting money from a client, it may not be a factor of whether they have the money or not. It's how to get the money to the right jurisdiction, because of changes in the law. Certain things you can't control, they happen. You have to, as a business, adapt and change the way you work to make sure you can achieve that success. And I think that's an achievement you've made, is by not having these fixed ways of doing business. Is about adapting and changing to make it work.
Yeah.
So tell us about the secret magic formula of turning 1 million into 6 million. I think we'd all like to know that, quite frankly.
Yeah, well, I'd like to be able to claim 100% of the credit, of course, but I have to say there was a bit of a following wind, and sometimes you do get that if you just kind of ride the cusp of something that's happening. And the story of this particular business was quite interesting, because I actually came in as MD, and I wasn't there at the very beginning. So there were two partners, and they'd had a big falling out because they didn't pair up in a smart way. They both were exactly the same as each other in terms of their skill set. So what that meant is that there were endless power plays, and they just weren't a very good match. So they had a big falling out. One of them went off to the US and left the other one to...
So can I just interrupt you there? That's very interesting what you're saying.
Yeah.
I mean, are you then saying that actually the best partnerships, a bit like you were saying earlier about marriage, the best partnerships are actually with people that are quite different?
Yeah. Very, very much so in business, because, of course, leverage is very important. And, we all have strengths and weaknesses, don't we? So I think generally it's always better to play to your strengths, isn't it, than try to shore up your weaknesses. And so the best business relationships, the best partnerships are with people who complement your weaknesses. Well, they basically have the skills that you don't. Those are always the strongest partnerships, definitely.
I was watching. I had a very long plane journey recently, and so it's always a good opportunity to catch up on movies.
Yeah.
So I was watching Bohemian Rhapsody. Are you guys Queen fans?
I'm a Queen fan.
Love that movie.
Yeah.
Oh.
And there's one thing. So you'll know. There's a scene in there where Freddie's gone off.
Spoiler alert! I wish it's
Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert! Everybody's seen it by now. Come on.
Great.
If you haven't seen it, go and see it. Anyway, we all know what happens to Freddie Mercury. But anyway, the point is that at one point he goes off and he tries to he splits from the band. He goes off and does his own thing. Then he reconciles with the band and he's like, what happened? And he goes, well, I went off and I hired a bunch of people to do what I said. And the problem was they did exactly what I said. Whereas the band, there was pushback, there were differences, and that all helped that creative machine, create incredible music. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Well, yeah. So anyway, when this guy brought me in, he was a creative director. So it was a moving image design agency. So he did what he did, and he loved the creative product, and he saw all the designers that worked under him as his little football squad. He liked football as well. So, they're all hand-picked, and they were all had their own particular strengths, and he had his way of putting together his team. But what I did was really completely opposite, because I was much more strategic, operational. I wouldn't say that I was particularly finance oriented. We did have a finance director, but marketing, business development, just constantly looking at the market, what's going on in the market, how can we evolve this, how can we get more clients, how can we make the offer, how can we somehow make it more of an opportunity, really, for clients. So I think, we did actually complement one another very well.
One of the things I want to ask you about, I want to get to the media industry, obviously, but it also says you're a thought leader and mentor. How do you go about manifesting that? Are you doing lectures and talks, and what do you do?
Well, obviously, I've written my book. I've got a Facebook page that I post on every day with sort of my daily meditations. And
Tell people where they can find that.
So it's just called The Smart Connector on Facebook, and I have a Facebook group, which is again called The Smart Connector. So we talk about entrepreneurial topics, and it's a little bit random because sometimes it is on Facebook groups, so people will post some very strange things sometimes, but that's fine. And LinkedIn, Instagram, all the usual.
They may have got lost trying to find a smart connector, and it's called something else connector.
Is that how you discovered Jane Lucky?
In fact, we met through, is it Facebook, is that right?
LinkedIn, I think.
LinkedIn.
I did a LinkedIn challenge, and then Lucky kept popping up, and I thought, this guy's
as he tends
great.
to do, honestly.
Yeah. And I thought, there he is again, and I thought, I actually started referring people to his page, because I said, look, this guy's LinkedIn page is amazing, because it's very varied. Some days he does videos, some days he does posts. He's hanging out in Mayfair. There he is with Chris Eubank, and showing off all these flash cars. He's doing all the right things. So some of the people that I mentor, because I mentor entrepreneurs, people, small business owners, and so on. And some of the time, obviously they want to know how to build their brand and how to basically achieve their goals. Particularly, they want to accelerate their business rapidly. So one of the things that I say is go and have a look at Lucky's LinkedIn page. So that was how I first came across him.
There you go. So, but Lucky doesn't need any advice, clearly, because he's being referred by Jane.
Yeah.
But here's your opportunity, Jalpish. What would you ask Jane?
What is your definition of an entrepreneur? Are you born with it? Or can you learn it? Or is there a different definition?
So whilst Lucky crunches into yet more jalebi, I'm sure you all heard that. But anyway, yes, go with that.
That's a very interesting question, and that's something that is very often asked. And I'm interested in the concept of neuroplasticity. So I believe that...
Explain that.
the brain constantly interacts with the environment. So I don't believe in a fixed mindset. I believe that that you should be open to influence, and that the brain has the ability to evolve and adapt depending on the influences that are around you and the influences that you accept. So it is an interesting concept, but I think that there have been studies to show that some people have a brain that predisposes them more towards entrepreneurship. Some people just don't. So, I mean, there is definitely an element of nature. But I also think nurture plays a part. And I know, for example, I didn't come from an entrepreneurial family. My father was a finance director. He was very straight down the line, very corporate guy. I had no idea about entrepreneurship, but I just kind of like fell into it because I was interested in creative things. And of course, entrepreneurship, you have to make money, don't you? If you're creative, you have to learn how to do it. So the first thing is you have to become entrepreneurial, because otherwise you're going to be broke, right? You can either be creative and broke, or you could be creative and entrepreneurial, but there isn't really much of a middle ground. So I just kind of fell into this environment where I was surrounded by entrepreneurial thinkers and entrepreneurial people. And, you know, it shapes you. It does, definitely.
Yeah, just to sort of highlight on that, I think entrepreneurs, would you say they take more risks? So although the objective is to make money,
Yeah.
you do tend to put your money sometimes where it shouldn't be placed. My parents were accountants, straight down the line.
Yeah.
And I'm always taking these risks, and they're always saying to me, that doesn't make financial sense. However, you see the outcome at the end. It didn't make financial sense for that year, the next year, or the year after. But even those mistakes allows you to learn your business.
Yes.
And as an example of that financial risk, he handed me a bottle full of gold earlier, which you won't be seeing again. Which you won't be seeing again. Yes, but yeah, anyway.
I think I'm sure it's a calculated risk. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah, so it's very interesting, and it's certainly quite true. And I also have my own podcast called Smart Connectors. So I've interviewed recently. I interviewed Mike Clare, he is the founder of Dreams Bed Store, and he sold the business for $222 million, which is an achievement by anybody's standards.
It's a few mattresses.
Yeah, it is a few mattresses.
I think I'll be dreaming of that.
Very good. Yeah,
that's right. But I actually had a discussion with him about this, and he said, he took a lot of risk in his life. He put his house on the line. He's started up, both him and other entrepreneurs that I've spoken to, they might have had an overall successful trajectory, but along the way, they've tried this and they've tried that, and that's failed and this has failed. And, they don't necessarily make a big deal about the failures, but I think it's unrealistic to think that anybody is going to just have a plain sailing trajectory as an entrepreneur. There are going to be downs and there will be ups, and that is just the nature of the beast.
But then what keeps you going through the downs? How do you know that at some point, all of these experiments and failures are going to be fruitful?
Well, that's a very interesting topic, isn't it? I'm sure Lackey's got a view on that as well. And that really is very much to do with mindset. Again, you have to train your mind. You cannot be somebody who is a worrier, for example. I mean, like my dad is a terrible worrier. He always worries about everything because he thinks that if he worries about something, that it somehow the problem is going to go away. And so I think you, as an entrepreneur, you have to train yourself really to say, look, I don't know what the outcome's going to be. I really don't, and that's okay, because I'm just having a go. I'm just having a go. And actually, isn't life just having a go?
Very good point. Lucky, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think I've had a couple of client meetings just recently, and it just reminds me of one particular client that I have, which has made the same mistake about 3 times in the last 4 years, and so I've had to almost take her out of her, because actually she's quite a worrier actually. So I've used the word counterintuitive. I said what you've got to start doing is actually be counterintuitive. Not so rather than thinking that this is a metaphor I use. Said when you're riding your bicycle, you go in that direction. With you, these are the 5 steps you need to take. These are tasks in relation to your accounting, for example. But you're doing them in a way that's actually intuitive to you. Think that's the right thing to do. I said in accounting, it doesn't work. So you need to actually almost be riding a bicycle backwards, but in reality you'll be taking forwards. Now how does that work? So what you're programmed to do is not necessarily the right thing to do when you're in business, because it may actually be taking you down a slippery slope in the wrong side of business. So I would say to actually counter these things, the solution is to maybe work with people in your industry who may be mentors or experts. So it's probably worth having a mentor or having a good, like with the smart connector, connecting smartly with the right people who are part of your team, and you can work with them. So maybe meet them once a week, and basically you could probably talk to Jane and say, look, I work in this industry. Anybody you can introduce who's going to give me somebody like-minded who's 10 years ahead of me in this particular area of business.
Yeah.
So there's strategies and you can adopt, I'd say.
Yeah. I think that's a very important point, Lucky. So, for example, with property development, there's an awful lot that I don't know about property development. I'll put my hands up. And even the most experienced developers that I know, they always say, every single project is different and I learn every time and I make mistakes every time. And so I do work in property development. I have been involved in a number of projects. But if there's anything that I want to know about property, I can't think I know it all myself. I mean, that is, that's very dangerous. You really have to know that there are a lot of people out there that know a lot more than you. And it's a question of knowing those people well enough to be able to phone them up, for them to be able to take your call, and for them to be able to tell you, because the goodwill is there, what you need to know. So, I mean, it is, yes, obviously you can formalize mentorships, and that's important as well. But it's also about having that power network.
I think I would say, like in the media industry, for example, is like you say, you don't know everything, and if you reach the stage where you think you know everything, then you know nothing. That's the thing. And media is like constantly changing. Like I started off as a print journalist working on a newspaper, and now I'm doing this. So it's constantly changing, and you're constantly having to adapt. And I've got a lot of contemporaries that haven't moved with the times, and they've been stagnant, and that's precisely why, because they don't move along. Now, so you want to say something?
Yeah, I've got I think one particular strategy that you can adopt is, depending on what sector you're from. Let's just say you're in property. I think having a power team that actually support you in what you're doing is very important, and having the right specialists. And if you're just starting off in your journey, you may not need Sorrel and Sugar in your team, because it's going to be a heavyweight compared to you. But if you're, let's just say, a 10 million plus turnover company, you may want the right solicitors, the right accountants, the right sort of, let's just say, management company to manage your portfolio. So I think having all those lined up is quite critical to your success. I think we actually specialize in actually providing people power teams, and you don't need to pay for it. I can say, look, talk to this guy, talk to that guy. So if you want to connect smart, speak to Jane, and if you need any people between me and Jane, we can probably source you anybody.
Well, lucky. That's good. So before,
Jalpesh as well. Actually, I'll be ringing Jalpesh.
You know what? He's plugged himself. Do you want to have a go as well?
No, I think he's done perfect.
Well, of course, the other thing about Lucky is he's got these great offices in Mayfair, around the corner from some incredible bars, and so you would always have fun in Mayfair with Lucky.
Fun in Mayfair. That's a whole other episode. Fun with Lucky in Mayfair. Okay, now bringing it back to our actual guest today, rather than one of our hosts. Before the Smart Connector, before the £6 million company, before all the rest of it, 20 years in the media. Film, television, advertising. How did that happen, and why the transition to what you're doing now?
Yeah, so Well, I started off working on the creative side because it was just something that I was interested in, as I said. So I actually started off working as a designer and an art director, which is one of the reasons why I ended up running a design agency. So I did that, but then I got interested in the business side as I saw it. So I started working for a small television company, and this was because obviously I'd already worked in film and TV. I'd done some commercials and things like that. So I just already had the contacts. So I started working in sales and marketing for a small television company. And then I just made the transition to a global advertising agency via an events company. So we did car launches. So that was quite fun.
There you go. Which cars? I've got to ask now.
Yes, Saab.
All right. They don't exist anymore.
I know. It was quite a long time ago. But
was that the 9000, was it? Or
yes, we did some very good competitive driving on the track.
Yeah.
You know, all the sensorics.
Which track was that?
It was in Sweden.
Ah, right. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sweden, yeah.
Yeah. So
we're not going to go there. Like, we've already talked about how Lucky knows Italian. Now he's going to reveal he knows Swedish as well. No. Let's come back to Jane. Yeah.
I mean, it was quite some time ago. But anyway, I ended up working for a global advertising agency called Young and Rubicam. So I was working in their for television department, developing business, managing high-level accounts, and that was when the owner of the design agency that I talked about approached me, and he told me he obviously knew about me. Somebody had mentioned me to him, and he said, you know, please come and join me. And he was the business was really on its knees by that time, because he'd spent about 9 months fighting this other guy, and it had just taken his eye off the ball, and it was actually technically insolvent by that time. So, you know, he really, really did need some help. And funnily enough, he did try to kind of shaft me on the contract because that kind of
come and help me.
Well, yes. Fortunately, I had a good lawyer, but you know, that's kind of par for the course, because you know he promised me. He promised me shares. Obviously, I had quite a good salary with shares, bonuses, and all the rest of it. And it kind of became apparent fairly quickly once I kind of realised what the problem was, and I realised how fixable it was, that we were going to make quite a lot of money. And at that point, I think he's like, oh, whoa, I'm not going to give all of that away. So that was kind of interesting. But anyway, I won, so that's good. And as I said, we grew it. It really took off within a year. And the reason how we managed to do that is simply we just changed the type of work. So we just aimed much higher. We said we're going to do these £1 million plus corporate identities, which meant we had to enter the global market. So we had to have a presence globally. So all the other businesses our side, they were all fiddling around in Soho. And I said to him, look, you're going to have to stop taking all the money out of this business and actually put a little bit back in, because you want to sell it, which he did. So he realised, because I think he'd been humbled, by this departure of his former partner, that he had to take my advice. So basically, we had a presence at the international television events. We chartered a yacht. We had a big banner. We were there at Cannes twice a year,
Wow.
just pretending to be much bigger than we really were.
We saw Jalpish down there as well, didn't you?
Yeah.
Well, we do look after a few yacht companies, and I think I'll be going to the Abu Dhabi GP this year.
Oh, right.
So hopefully, we'll see. I try to stay on the other side so no one can see me, but let's see what happens.
Yeah.
Jalpish's secret is out now. Sorry to interrupt, Jane.
Personally, I love yachts, so that was a really, really fun thing to do.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yes.
In terms of, I would say that from moving away from X market to Y market, which is high-end, sort of million plus.
Yeah.
how did you derive that decision? Because it's actually a major, you could sort of say, step change in terms of that business.
It was.
How was that derived? Because that would be probably like the pivotal part of what's happened in your success, I would say, in that.
Well, absolutely. Well, it was just a question that the market had changed. So they used to do title sequences and commercials, and both of those markets had changed. They just weren't fertile ground anymore. And I've been working in business development and marketing and sales for quite a long time. So it was quite easy for me to spot that they were, if you like, flogging a bit of a dead horse.
Sorry to interrupt, but the question is, why is it that this gentleman who's actually in that industry for probably a lot longer than yourself, not actually probably sees probably like a more global understanding of his business, why is it that he wasn't able to actually see this?
Sometimes it's a case of fresh pair of eyes and a fresh perspective, isn't it?
Well, it was also that he was a creative. So, in media, creatives, they're just thinking differently. They just want to do something.
So he's like more the
cool.
mad professor, and you are more like the more strategic in your thinking. Would you say that's correct?
More the business. You did the business brains. I mean, he wasn't a stupid guy. He was quite shrewd. Obviously he would have been. I mean, that was why he tried to shaft me on the contract. But so he wasn't entirely stupid, shall we say.
Right.
Really his focus was on just doing like really spectacular creative work. Now that was very important, because had they not done spectacular creative work, none of this would have worked, because it was a creative business. So the work had to be really, really good. It's just it wasn't being brought to the right audience. So that was once we made the decision that we had to go global, then it worked.
I mean, and was that a challenge to try and get him to think in that way? Because obviously he's probably stuck in his own box in terms of how he thinks, and you're changing the business to a completely different type of thinking. Was that probably the biggest challenge, would you say? Well,
yes. I think if he didn't trust me, then he wouldn't have agreed to it. To be fair to him, he put a lot of trust in me. He really did. And he went with it. He took the risk, and it paid off.
Just to jump in, that's quite brave, because there's businesses where you can see it's going wrong, but if you're salaried, you just toe the line and get your salary. And then you think, I'll look at another place once this one's gone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Whereas to stand up for yourself and to see something and try and drive that business forward to the next level so it doesn't just die is quite a challenging thing to do. Because even as a consultant, you could just say, I'll just take my consultancy role for 1 year. I know it's not going to last much longer, so I'll pick up another one afterwards. Whereas challenging it, you could be gone in a month, but you're taking the risk to say, this is how I can have a business succeed and be here longer term.
Yes, well, there was a bit of personal desperation behind that, shall we say, because I was a single parent at that time, so I wasn't seeing my children. So I'd leave in the morning when they were asleep, and I'd come back at night when they were asleep, and that would be kind of 5 days a week, and my daughters were young at the time. So I knew that he wanted to sell the business. That was his goal. Because that was what a lot of people, that's what people do in media. They build up businesses and they sell them and they exit with many millions of pounds, and that it obviously gives them the opportunity to have a great life. So that was exactly what he wanted to do, and because he'd offered me shares, then I knew that I could exit at the same time.
So there's the motivation right there.
That was the motivation.
Yeah. So amazing discussion here, but we're coming up to the end of the show. So just final thoughts from Lucky and Jalpesh, and then we'll finish with you as well.
Well, the message I've taken away from Jane and her book is that if you're out there and you're networking, try and work with people that are like-minded, who've got healthy values, and they actually, let's just say, they want to give value to you first. It's a conversation we had pretty much prior to this podcast, and I think that resonates. So if people want to help you, they want to work with you long term, try and work with those sort of people, and they could actually transform your journey rather than having somebody working with you just to try and get what they want out of you. Okay?
I think what I've learned is if you approach one person, they don't value you, doesn't mean you're not worth anything. Just approach a different person who does value you. And I think that's how you can build success.
Absolutely. Yes, and so just to expand on that, I just wanted to say that I really believe that it's important to give value first, because Lucky and I were talking about this upstairs, because when you give value first, then you see what comes back, and then you know who you're dealing with. So don't hold back, never feel as though your knowledge or whatever it is that you have to offer is so precious that you can't put it out there from day one. Be on the front foot, when it comes to relationships, and give value. And that's how you get noticed, and that's how people start to, build loyalty and respect for you.
So where can people find you, and where can they get your book?
Yeah, so the book is available on Amazon.co.uk and on Amazon.com. It's in all three formats: Audible, print, and on Kindle e-reader. So I have a website, janebayler.com, and there's a Calendly booking system if anybody wants to book in a chat with me. I'm on LinkedIn. I've got a Facebook group, The Smart Connector, Facebook page, The Smart Connector, and Instagram. Yeah, I'd love to connect with people, obviously.
So more than one way of getting hold of Jane.
Yeah.
So so if you want to do that, absolutely do that.
Multi-channel.
Yeah.
Multi-channel, as it always should be, and as the Big Jalebi is as well. So don't forget to check out our other channels, all of our social media profiles. Make sure that you subscribe so you don't miss any of these episodes. Thanks for watching, and do please join us again on the next Big Jalebi.